Hi, this is Natu, a guy who's way too old and way too long involved in this game, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Talk to Thorin, and for this one, my guest is going to be Natu, who is an old-school Counter-Strike professional from CS 1.6, but in CSGO, people will know him better, obviously as the marketing director and a founder of ENCE. Right, this is an interview. It's largely going to be about like industry side of things, but obviously you're someone coming from a pro background. Right, one thing I actually wanted to get clear at the outset, because one thing that's probably going to surprise people in this interview, I hope, is I know a lot of fans, they almost think it's like football. Like in football, generally it is true that the teams that spend the most money do the best are the ones that win the Premier League or are in the Champions League and stuff, with notable exceptions. And, you know, if you're a team that, for example, doesn't have the owner from Saudi Arabia or wherever it is, odds are you're a mid-table team or a lower team. You know, these are the standard things. So I think most people's perception of the industry is like the industry will take care of itself. I just have to watch the product in the server. So in the case of Counter-Strike, if the team's good, I'm sure they're all doing great. But I actually know with your team, when people are going to find out some of the information, they'll probably actually be surprised at maybe the performance of some of the teams or who you're able to get into the squads and some of these aspects tied to the industry elements where maybe, I mean, they'll find out, spoiler, ENCE isn't FaZe Clan. It's not the biggest org in the world. I don't think I'm really teasing anything there. I think people get that part. But let's start out here, though, because one thing I actually found confusing myself, but it makes sense if you are from Counter-Strike, is in Counter-Strike, we all know, even though in the modern day, these are teams and organisations, it all starts with Counter-Strike, just having like an IRC channel or the name. You have to just have, it starts the same way as when you're a kid. There's your name and at least 2 or 3 people. And then, even then you can put the question marks in the lineup and the IRC heading, and basically it all starts that way. So the problem here, I'm going to get to now, is basically the name of ENCE, because the reason it's going to be a bit confusing to fans is this: like every other clan name in Counter-Strike, they're never allowed to die. They just, and even if someone like the people who made it aren't even there anymore, someone always comes along like, yeah, I'm in that team. The worst was American ones. They'd have like names from 8 years ago and nobody's in the team anymore. Like, why is that name then? It's just because the name became more famous, you know. So the question I have initially is just a serious one, which is, I know ENCE essentially, there was like an ENCE and it was a team and it was playing like Finnish Counter-Strike, but it wasn't ENCE the company now with Natu and all the boys. So what's the initial story there of like how it even came to be that you're in ENCE and then ENCE starts to move towards like real org, not just team name or placeholder or something?
Yeah. I mean, well, actually, in 2013, ENCE was established as a company, and the idea was to make it into a professionalized, esports in Finland. And I actually played in ENCE at that time for a period of about a year. Notoriously, I think we went through like 20 players throughout that time. Nothing would stick, and then eventually the whole operation would just die because things were not, like, Finland was not ready for professionalism in any means at that time.
Does that mean at the time the part of the reason why the players were changing is, were you basically almost like semi-pro amateur status?
Yeah. Right. We were not getting paid at the time. I was working full time at the time already. Playing for me was like I guess semi-professional is probably the best way to put it. But it was like a serious hobby that you kind of took as a professional almost at the time. But yeah, that lasted like a year, and then all of ENCE just kind of went to hiatus because there was no funding. Things were not progressing the way that the guys that were running the company at the time were hoping. Just took a time out, and before we restarted it in 2016.
Because I know another aspect to this story is that early on, obviously, like I say, there isn't, like, you're not in a position like the Americans are where you follow like a certain blueprint. Like, if people don't know there, you essentially just get the people who know how to raise the money with the venture capital people. You give them a great pitch. It's like one of those Silicon Valley shows that people don't know. It's more like a tech startup in America than it is like esports or sports team. So I know you were going more towards like almost the sports team angle, right? Because wasn't it initially, when was it that you were going to have like you were already quite early on in talks with like a local hockey team or something along those lines to potentially get some sort of funding, right?
Yeah. We actually worked with a local hockey team, but this was in 2017. We made a deal with them actually, but that was like, so 2018 was when we started to kind of skyrocket, right? With the CSGO team that we signed, and then, went on to do great things in 2019. Things kind of escalated so quickly or rapidly in that a short period of time that the hockey team was not willing to invest in the way that we would have needed to for it to make sense. So eventually that deal actually broke off. We've maintained a relationship with those guys though, and they've helped us in a bunch of things, in terms of sports management and things of that nature, kind of giving us coaching help and this and that over time. But like in the big picture, the concept and the idea of the deal that we had at the time just didn't come through because of just how quickly things started to get bigger for ENCE.
One part that I'd like to bring into the story here, because people will know, obviously, before it became the full-blown ENCE that people know now, Allu actually played in the team during these sort of middle years that we're talking about here. After the team exists, it's not quite a full-on, like, massive esports org. And the reason why I want to bring this angle up is this, because I know, obviously, sadly, with the way the story's being told now, he's going to be seen as, like, the fucking villain of ENCE or something. But it's like, I always tell people this, in the early years, and especially the first ones, mate, before even the good lineup later, I always used to say, like, he's actually doing Finland and ENCE a massive favour by playing for this team. Like, he is overqualified. Like, it's not a joke. Not only did he come from an IP, he could be other teams at that level offering him spots at this time. Really good players want to play with him. So, like, this initial period from Allu, I know that first lineup wasn't the one that blew up, but he himself came in and out of the lineup. But that actually, none of it really happens in CS without Allu, right?
No, for sure. I think it was his passion and him wanting to bring Finland to the forefront. It's definitely one of the catalysts why everything happened. And we had to try it a few times, right? In 2016, when ENCE came back, when I became a part of the management team and one of the founders, Allu was the guy that we built a team around. It was Sunny, it was Xarte, Stonde, what am I missing here? Juho, I think. So basically trying to piece together like what made the most sense at the time. I think the core of that lineup without Allu had been really close from making it to one of the majors, like late 2015, showing some good signs. And then we signed them in early 2016, January 2016, to try to, beat the world, so to speak. Didn't work out. It was like, 7 months later, Allu was sold to FaZe. And then we actually then signed a couple of guys. You might know Alexi B, Arvid, and a bunch of younger guys. Nasu actually as an older guy still coming in as well somewhere there along the lines. It was a bit of a failed attempt in the beginning, but I guess we just were dumb enough not to give up.
Even that angle, though, like, in fact, as you say, it's twice that Allu basically did it. But I think almost in a weird way, that also helped the project. Because it's like, as the project was growing, it got like the boost each time he came out. I'll give the analogy, if people don't know, one of the reasons why, even though like the pure fun of doing an event as like an analyst isn't that much, it's not that crazy when you've done 70 of them or whatever. It's way cooler in the first 15, put it that way. One of the reasons why you keep doing them is because there's a natural sort of symbiotic relationship in your career. Like, you do the event, people see you on the event, then they might be interested in your content keeps you relevant and you get on the event, so it helps it start. In the same way, I feel like Allu being in NIP, like, that's one of the biggest teams in the world, one of the most popular. Then he starts out ENCE, interesting project. Then he goes away, he's in FaZe Clan, so people don't know, you're one of the best teams in the world again. Then he comes back and now it's in ENCE again, but this time, as you're saying, now when he comes like 2018 or whatever it was, now it's like you're starting to get the real ENCE though. Because one of the things I found very interesting about that angle was, as you say, the first ENCE was all about like I mean, a lot of it was like older players or also semi-pro people, but it was like changing the fifth and fourth position around, or if Nasa wants to play for 6 months, he comes in, then he goes out again to do whatever he's doing. This lineup was like, if people don't know, I always say, when it got really successful in 2019, it's actually one of the only teams I've ever seen that had the whole lineup the previous year and didn't have the success and somehow stuck through it all. So was there a different philosophy to like the talent or who you were sticking with in ENCE once it got going?
To kind of pack that a little bit, in 2017 we had a shitty CS team that only lasted a couple of months, and then we kind of downscaled, I think, all of ENCE. It was a late 2017. Basically, ENCE was ran by two people. It was me and Petri, who is still actually the biggest shareholder at ENCE today.
He's a very famous person in Finnish esports, right?
Yeah, exactly. It goes by the nickname Procyon. He has been running tournaments and leagues here in Finland for the better part of the last 20 years. And I remember actually vividly, we had a phone call. I was doing a pro league in Copenhagen, as I did. I did a lot of commentary and studio stuff at the time. We had a late night phone call. I'm like, dude, it's do or die now. Like, we push all our chips in the middle. We try to do something with Counter-Strike, or we just fold and just don't do anything with ENCE, because it doesn't kind of make sense to be somewhere here in the middle of nowhere where nothing makes sense. It's not big enough to for it to be sustainable for either of us to fully focus on it. So now it's time to do something. And then along goes like a month or something, and then he calls me like, hey, so I have Allu building us a team. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then he got the pieces together. I can't remember exactly how the chain went exactly, like who got who. But the idea was to try to get a lineup that makes the most sense out of the components that we had in Finland. And the joke is we maybe had 3 or 4 months worth of salary in our bank account to even pay these guys. And they were not on with huge contracts when they were signed initially, right? So we were really going for it, like all in. Like, this is either going to work or we're just going to, end this history. And,
by the way,
it all worked out.
For you yourself, like, what was that? Because this is many years we're talking about before we get to this first lineup that's going to have the big success and people are going to know. So in all these years, like, what was your own situation? Because as you say, it's not even that you necessarily, it's not like you've got a whole career set. It's like, if CSGO doesn't work, we just do StarCraft or whatever. The whole company's potentially like on a tightrope. It's like, it has to work out, or what? You have to just go up and get a real job, or would you have got a different job? Did you see yourself at the time as like, I'm an executive, or I'm like an office guy now? What was your vision of your own career?
So I was, at the time, I had my own personal company, and basically what paid the bills for me was doing all the events, all the gigs, some consultancy stuff.
You were still doing some analysis gigs, right?
Yeah, every now and again. And that was like my main thing. But then ENCE was something I built. Let's say I would, from like how much I spent time, was like 50% on the analysis stuff and going to tournaments and stuff. And then while I was traveling, I was also working on ENCE, about 50-50. And then when things started to get more serious with ENCE, when things started to develop finally, that's when I started to move my focus towards ENCE, because effectively I just had to for it to push forward.
Did you, by the way, ever have a sense, because these are the sort of years, actually, where I know in American esports, that's when basically every big org that people can think of, Team Liquid, Cloud9, all of them started to take the venture capital money, where you just take in the millions and millions, you give them some of the equity of your company, and basically, if people don't know who are fans, this is what makes this discussion complicated whenever you talk about the industry, because there's two sets of people in the industry. There's the people on the old model, where you try and run an actual business that can just survive off the money it brings in to keep paying the workers, to keep doing the job. So people understand that premise. But then the other people with the VC, they're almost sort of playing like chicken with each other, because their premise is like, we're going to sign the biggest players and do the biggest things, but we're actually losing money and we need more money coming in through the VC. And basically that one's almost like, they're almost, I'd say, like betting on a future of esports, that one day it'll be so big it's all worth it, and just surviving to that point made it there. It sounds like your company in this position, you're in the older model, right? Has there ever been a scenario like, has ENCE come close to trying to do big VC raises and stuff? Because the weird thing to me is, obviously with Tommy, if people don't know, this is why I love when fans tell me that like Leppänen doesn't know about business. He has like a company on the side you guys don't even know about that he got funded with like $200 million. Like, he definitely knows all the finance people. Don't you worry about that, fans. He knows that he fucking lived in London and worked in the business. So like, I'm sure in theory, if ENCE wanted to, they could go for that now. So is there a philosophy of ENCE that it has to stay at a certain size, or you're trying to work within certain parameters or something?
So I think in the big picture, if you look at like the history of ENCE, I think one of the things why we haven't gone the route of VC money or even ended up in that situation is probably because of the market that we're from. Finland hasn't been like, or isn't the biggest market in the world. Hence, it hasn't necessarily been like, we haven't been the most interesting target in that sense, as we were smaller. Now that we have gradually become more and more internationally known, now we run an international CSGO team, as an example. That situation definitely has changed. And it is something we've been discussing about, the potential of doing a funding round, for sure. Because the fact of the matter is that we can operate as we are right now, well and fine. That's not a problem. But without having that kind of capital behind us, it does limit our risk-taking opportunities, or the possibilities for us to for example, move into new games as an early adopter. never see us, at least for the time being, to be the first, to jump into a new game whenever that happens. Which I think in a sense is also a positive thing, but it might mean that we might miss an opportunity here and there. But all at the same time, it means that we actually do our due diligence really, really well. We think about it as a business case each time we go into a game and think about working in a specific title. It has to make sense for us economically. So I think that's kind of part of our DNA too. That's how we operate.
With that story I said earlier, that a lot of people are just not aware of how long the 2019 ENCE lineup actually basically existed for most of 2018. It was even going to tournaments. Like, I remember most famously, right at the end of 2018 was where the team obviously had this really good run at the fucking Star Series, but because it was the one where loads of the big teams turned it down. I even worked that event. Everyone was like, it gives a fuck about this event. In fact, the fact that like ENCE won it was almost just like, it's not legit, is it? Because you needed like I think a mouse spots or something was there. We needed like the big name to win it to make it seem legit. So at the time, everyone was like, they're not going to do anything as a team. Like, the thing is, this isn't like an unusual pattern though, because if you ever look at the history of Counter-Strike, most teams get really good in the first like 3 months. Basically like the lineup usually clicks. Like you even have a couple of maps you're just good on immediately. It's actually quite rare to have this long to sort of develop as a team. So like, as someone watching the team, knowing them inside, what would you say the story was? How did they go from just like average, I wouldn't even say tier 1, they were like a tier 2, like mid tier 2 team, to legitimately one of the best teams in the world, obviously beating the Astralises in major that would be like fantasy stuff if you told people that at the beginning of the lineup.
Yeah. I mean, I was there from the very beginning. Actually, funnily enough, even though having all my responsibilities in the company, I also ended up being their coach for a while in 2018. This was like from, I think, April until August. I think August is when Twist joined up with us. We finally found ourselves a full-time coach. I think it was basically a few things. First of all, there was no pressure for them to become like top 5 in the world over the course of a certain specific amount of time, right? But we gave them time to kind of mold in and develop. There was a real grinder's attitude on each of the players. They were working their hearts out all the time, and they managed to make it like a few steps at a time. The progression just made a lot of sense, right? Like, after a few months, the early parts were a little rough. They were getting their asses kicked in online cups, as you usually do. Then we got a lucky break. We got invited to a LAN qualifier for IAM Cologne 2018, which we managed to win. Went on to IAM Cologne in 2018. Had a decent run there. We beat, I want to say, NIP. We beat Mouse Sports, I think. And then we lost to Navi in like in the game that could have made us go into the playoffs, and we lost in a 3-mapper series.
And they won the event, if people don't know, so it was kind of a rough loss to take at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Then went on to the Faceit Majors Minor, lost 2 or 3 opportunities to qualify for the major, a massive blow. That was one of those kind of low points where the team, I think, lost a bit of their confidence, but I think in the big picture, it was actually probably a good thing that they didn't make the major at that point in time. Then went on to grind a couple of tournaments in the fall, and then the Star Ladder one you mentioned, where they won in a final against Vega Squadron in a best of 5, where I think we had a massive lead, but then you could just tell they were nervous. They were not able to clinch the game, but then eventually managed to do it. And I think once they won that tournament, and then there was a DreamHack Open right after they won as well, the team was just full of confidence. And I think Twista and Alexi B and Allu, as a trio, were doing a really, really good job of leading that team.
One thing I found very interesting about this squad as well is, if people don't know, this actually isn't the traditional way that Finnish teams were built. Because obviously in CSGO, there hasn't been loads and loads and loads of top Finnish talent. Or if there has, I'd say there has, but they just haven't tried to be pro, unfortunately. A lot of them didn't really care. I mean, a lot of them barely even would care about playing FPL. It seems like they're just natural talents in the old school way. So the problem is this: if people know, when Finland used to have loads of talent, like back in your day as a top pro, that was when actually it used to be like a lot of places, it would just stack the star star players, and then you just try to get as many of the star players in one team as you can, and then you go out there and it's like fucking Space Jam. You just try and beat the aliens, which is all the other countries, you know. That's like the joke. But the problem is that I always thought, even despite talent, the best Finnish teams are always the ones where it has good team play, when like the people fit together. Like there's even famously been some lineups where they did do the cynical move where they kick the worst player for the better skill player. It makes the team worse. Like some of the best lineups are the ones where just the players that work together. To me, this is like the ultimate example of that, mate. Because even though now a couple of these players, like obviously Alexibi has a career after this, I'm sure Allu could play in a top team. I think maybe if he's in the right squad, someone like look, the rest could be in teams, but they would never be like, they wouldn't be in the HLV top 20 ever, probably most of them, right? This team, like to me, looks like one of the best team play teams I think Finland's ever produced. Like when this squad was together, man, they were mega in the server, mate. Like the amount of times I saw them just using Counter-Strike fundamentals to work together to kill like the most skilled players in the game. It was crazy. Like the idea that ENCE lineup could ever beat Na'Vi is mental when you think about Simple and Electronics. Like this lineup must have been something special.
For sure. I remember when it was first announced, even yourself and everyone, especially like, this is like a retirement home for Allu. Like, what is this shit,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Which is fair. It's fair enough, right? When you're looking outside in, players you've never heard of put together. But it's also that longevity they played together, that all the routines became so apparent for them. They knew exactly what each other were doing, how they would react on the server. And then on top of that, individually, they were all peaking. And I think the AUG meta was definitely helping that lineup a lot. And we were doing really good job with that. X7 was nuts with it. Alexibi was nuts with it. The only one actually that hated it was Ariel, but even he eventually started using it because it was so OP at the time. But still, even if it, whatever meta, whatever it is, still it was some kind of magic they just found. I think it's something that some of the individuals in that team didn't realize to even appreciate at the time.
Yes.
But now that they don't have it anymore, they understood why everything works so well together, because there were some opposites. Obviously, we've seen now afterwards with Alexibi and Allu, for example, they were like the yin and yang in a sense to that lineup, even though they were most likely not the best of buddies as human beings. You don't need to be that either, as long as it professionally works and you're kind of sparring one another, you're kind of poking one another to be better at what you do.
Obviously, one angle that I wanted to ask about was when this lineup was getting really, really good, because it wasn't the most crazy, like, all-star lineup of the most skilled players in the world. Another thing I thought was really epic for Finnish teams is, if people don't know, not just Finnish Counter-Strike teams, but it's almost like, from the time I spent there, it's almost like in the DNA of Finnish people. It's like, it's how hockey goes almost every single year, if people don't know. It's like, oh, we're leading 1-0 on Sweden. Shit, Sweden wins 2-1. It's like, oh, Finland's basically the country that's always second and third. It's like, oh, bloody, we're so close. And so even though, like, on paper, ENCE came second and third a lot, dude, this team used to win in the clutch games. If this was ever like a 14-14 game, I put my money on ENCE. Like, they used to win so many of those games. That used to be sort of the bane of Finnish Counter-Strike. Like, essentially, you guys had the Team Liquid rep before Team Liquid. It's like we always just lose when we're like up one map and then we lose 2-1 in series. 14-14. They win the OT game or whatever. Like, that's another cool thing about this team. It must have had like a really good mental sort of fortitude inside.
I think it's actually just it's a good little example to pinpoint the hockey one there, because it is very true from, I would say, about 10 years ago that was exactly what would happen with a lot of the Finnish hockey teams, and also with the Finnish Counter-Strike teams, that they were really, really good, but they were just not able to make it across the finish line. But now it feels like there's been some kind of a generational change of some sorts, because in hockey we're winning Olympic golds and world championships left, right, and center right now. And the same thing with the CS, they don't have that kind of fear, I guess. I suppose, they're more just focused on getting the job done, and they keep getting it done more often than they don't. So I think it's definitely been a bit of a change there. There was only a couple of glimpses when you think about the Finnish history in Counter-Strike. There's only been a few blips on the radar. And we've always had good players, but in terms of teams, there's only been a few times when there's been legitimately teams that could contest for the absolute top in the world. And then eventually those teams would die because people were just being dumb. Basically, it's been the same over and over and over and over again.
That part in itself must be satisfying for you personally then. Like the idea, not only did you build ENCE, which is now a legitimate like Finnish organisation, and this obviously was at the time a purely 5-man Finnish lineup, but like you say, you essentially got a team to the point where that's like you reached the same peaks that Finnish CS had ever reached in your time.
Yeah. Well, no, for sure. Definitely our goal as well going into it initially was to bring specifically Finnish Counter-Strike to the forefront, play on the biggest stages. Yeah, I think the things that happened in 2019 and how quickly they rise to all the way to the top, I think that surprised everyone, us included. I don't think we were ready as an organization to kind of like the problem with that is that it happened also quickly that we were still gradually growing as an organization to build all the structures around this team, and partially our fault, of course, that it all kind of collapsed in the end as well, right? So it's bittersweet in a sense, but also when I think about it, had we not had all those experiences we did in that period of time, I don't think we would be here today. So,
sure. I mean, one thing I think very interesting as well is I know when I did my interview with Allu, his story of like what happened at that kind of ENCE major, the one where you make it to the final, is so mental. Because if people don't know, like within the story, he takes like an off day to go and like see the birth of his child.
Yeah.
Then comes back, and obviously the team was like down in the fucking Swiss system or whatever. Like nothing at this point in time points to like we're going to be in the final of the major. And also at that point in time as well, like it's still very rare you get like small fluke teams go far in the major. Usually the major is so much pressure. Like you saw it in obviously this one, like by the time people get to like the quarters, they just fall away even if they're good teams, even if you've had a good run. So that has to be one of the most surreal runs you've seen.
It most definitely was the most surreal run I've ever witnessed in my life, for sure. I remember actually vividly, I was there during the second phase of the major. We were down 0-2 in the Swiss. We were down 1-0 in maps against Big. We were down 7-0 on the second map. I remember sitting there and we couldn't even go watch the game because it was played behind closed doors. So I was literally in Poland, Katowice, in a lobby of a hotel watching our team. And I'm like, fuck. We're going to be out. We're going to have to qualify once again to the minors and everything. And then, like a snap of the fingers, they started winning. They somehow miraculously win that map. They win the third map. They went on to win the rest of the other two games in the second phase and make it into the quarters. I had actually, like, this is how much I believed in the team. I had booked flights to go back home on like the Friday because we had the quarters on the Thursday. So
I mean, understandable. Yeah, you got to save money, right? True.
I watched the quarterfinals there. We win the game. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Okay, well, I need to go fly back. I think I had some kind of family thing I had to go to, actually. So I flew back home. I watched the semifinals at home with my family and my friends. I'm like, we win the finals. Okay, now I need to fly back to like, I'm not gonna miss my own team playing the major final, right? So I flew back again into Katowice to watch the finals. Ended up losing it, but still reminiscing that whole journey. It was absolutely surreal. Absolutely surreal.
By the way, that's one thing I'd never thought about. It's because I'm pretty sure everyone else, except obviously ENCE and Finnish fans and the Finnish guys like you, right? The rest of us, we all remember that semi-final for that famous, simple, like, attempted 1v4, obviously, where he doesn't get the kill on, like, X7, where he switched over to the AWP, right? The reason why that's mad is because when we watch that, that's like when someone almost scored a mega goal. It's like, oh, so close. You guys must have been loving that. Dude, I bet that was the most insane miss of all time when he just whiffed that. I bet you were fucking loving that.
Yeah, no, I remembering also what the ramifications would have been if Simple had won that.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, we would have been out like 100%. Sure. They would have won the game, right? So, yeah, in that moment, it was, and watching back at it, it's like, it's just one of those simple moments, but fortunate for me and for the Finns, that didn't come through.
I also thought as well, one thing I've always loved about Counter-Strike is because we have so many tournaments, it means there's so many sort of like little potential storyline threads. So a great one about this one is, yeah, obviously you lost to Astralis. And by the way, they were just the best team. Like no one was going to beat them at this tournament. Right? When you lost to Astralis in this final, you have the cool angle where it's not that long after that you have the Blast tournament where you beat them and essentially ended their era. Like if people don't know, that was the one where their streak on Nuke stopped like 2 maps short of like breaking the record of all time. Like that ends up being like a pretty cool storyline. That's like the movie later on, the revenge match, right?
Yeah. You can actually go back and watch from our YouTube channel. This is going to be a shameless plug, but we do a lot of behind the scenes content, right? And there's actually stuff from that Blast event and them talking about it. Oh, do we have a chance to actually win the record? I remember them talking about it. It's like, think about it. We're going to win the record, and then they're down, and we're going to just beat their ass in the second map. Or something. It's pretty funny. You should definitely go check it out. Yeah, they definitely recognize that the opportunity they had there to spoil their party.
I do remember Allu's tweet when he actually did it, which was the most Allu tweet of all time. Just like, had to be done. Just like, all it said, like, all right, fucking. If you have to just know his personality, you know, that just is what he would do. He's not even pretending that it's just who he is, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's quite the character, that guy. But I think sometimes I must say that he's kind of wrongly understood because of himself and how his demeanor online and on interviews and kind of the Kimi Räikkönen kind of impression he's always made to people, right? But he's actually a very funny, open, talkative person, but you just don't really get to see
Let's talk about this a bit then, because, for example, one thing I was going to say is this. One of the reasons why I think people have taken the whole story, because essentially the storyline became it's Allu versus fucking Alexi B, which isn't even totally true. People know the actual story. Like, there was, by the way, spoiler, there was other players in that team also voted against Alexi B. It's just, now it's not popular, says it. They've all come out, they've had the drama, and now people don't know. Now the joke is now you have to wait years before they'll ever tell the truth on that one, but whatever. What I would say is this, though. The reason why I understand why there would be an actual conflict there is this, right? The one problem I've seen, because I've heard Alexi B on his comps when he's in OG. I know a little bit about when he's in this team. I've just looked at some of the squads he's been in. The problem I have is this, right? He reminds me a bit, actually, fully, it reminds me a bit of Tommy. He's like, as a tactician, as that role in the game, he's killing it. He's doing his job really well. But if people don't know, the thing with Tommy is, I always used to tell him, is like, mate, you sort of need someone else. You need essentially, like, when Ave was in his team, he had like Zonic as well. The premise is like the two of them together. That's like a complete captain, isn't it? You've got all the aspects you need. Whereas I used to tell Tommy, like, your problem is you don't really want to sort of like lead them as men, though, dude. You just want to like tell them the tactics, and if they do it, problem solved, right? But they also like they expect the IGL to be the leader as well. You have to sort of be that. So in ENCE, wasn't it more like not essentially Allu was the captain, right? Like Alexi B was the tactician. That was it. Kind of like naturally, it felt to me like it was always Allu's team to some degree, right? He had the sort of he was the emotional leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. I mean, he was the veteran of the team, so naturally he was the captain of the team. But of course, there's some kind of a click there when the tactician or the IGL is the different guy. But like I earlier said, I feel like they never even probably appreciated the kind of symbiosis they had going on there, and kind of what they both brought on the table in terms of leadership and how the team ran at the time. But also, Alexi as a person also is very persistent, has a very strong vision of how he feels, the game should go, but it also showcases in him as an individual and how outspoken he is. I mean, you can probably tell from all the interviews and stuff he's done over the years, right? And then you have Allu, who's probably not as outspoken as a person, but also is very, very like a strong personality, needs his space. He's going to have these moments where he's going to have his say. He's going to take the reins when need be sometimes. And I think that end of the day, when you look at it from this perspective now, a couple of years later, I don't think they would realize how good they had it.
I think it was basically implied when I actually did my interview with Allu. He might even have openly said this. I think he sort of says now that he understands, for example, like what Alexi did as like an in-game leader, and essentially what a lot of people have come to the conclusion of, which is like Allu's a great secondary caller, or if you give him like his moments when he's feeling it, he's going to do a good call. But that isn't really what being an in-game leader is. And spoiler, loads of star players have found this out over the years. We've seen them all do the swap for 3 months to IGL. There's a reason they all swap back. It's not as sexy as they think. So It sounds like they sort of get it in that regard. But here's the one thing I would ask. Obviously this isn't like a drama episode. We're trying to get all the fucking juice, like I said, like whatever's out there is out there. But one thing I would ask is this. There is also an element of, like I say, where it wasn't just like Allu woke up and was like, kick Alexi B. It wasn't like that. Like basically there was sort of like other reasons behind the scenes, right? How would you explain publicly like why the team chose to go a different direction? What would the simple explanation be? I mean, I've heard essentially like some things. I don't think Alexi B has ever denied this, but wasn't he sort of like, I mean, I heard a story that he didn't want to do a boot camp before a major or something. Like there was like a few sort of like, I mean, these are sort of like, kind of red flags if you're an org to some degree.
I don't think he was helping his cause. Prioritizing other things at points in time for sure. But at the end of the day, big picture, I think the big reason why things ended up going that way is Sonny whispering in the backgrounds, affecting people. How great it would be if he was in the team. Allu buying into it, and you had Sergey buying into it, and then eventually Twista buying into it, right? And there was a world where we would have lost like half of the team basically around the Katowice major. And then so we were in the ropes basically and had very little to kind of negotiate in terms of...
If ENCE hadn't made the final of Katowice, do you think the lineup just changes and Sonny just comes straight in?
I mean, there was a world where the aforementioned trio would have left ENCE and forced their way out basically to a different org.
Right.
With Sonny. So... Right. That was the situation, and then eventually I don't even remember why, but they decided that they didn't want to do it. They kind of kept on playing, but Sonny was always there in the background, kind of lurking him, figuring out his way into the team in one way or the other.
That's the other part that I always thought was a bit unfair about the way fans treated it. Is like, here's the part from the side of the ENCE players that I know that to me makes perfect sense. They'll even tell me it, like, think about how I described it earlier. It's like, we weren't a new team. Like, remember, we'd already been together for well over a year when we were still like number 2, number 3 in the world. And, people were saying we have a chance to win the major, but we're not winning some of the tournaments. Like, we won like the odd one, like the Blast. And in fact, they tell me, like, the problem is actually it took everything just to get like those seconds and thirds, and we sort of knew like we're not going to win. So at the time the logic was, is there any move we can do that somehow gives us like that last burst that takes us to the top? And obviously the whole time you have to remember, fans, it's only a year or two earlier Sonny was one of the best players in the world, but he was playing in the national team. He was essentially in the allu spot where he can come and go down and come to this Finnish team and we can go to the top together. So their logic was like, we don't know who it'll necessarily be that gets kicked, but at some point we have to try this. Like once the team goes down a little bit, this is the obvious move to do. I mean, it's the star player, right? If he comes in and he's really good, maybe we go to the top. Like that vision, like that makes sense. There's a logic to that.
Yeah, I think there's a universe where that could have worked, to be honest. I mean, they were thrown into a situation where they had to literally play a tournament like 3 days after the Starlighter Major when the swap happened, right? Yeah. Went to Blast in Moscow, and then straight after flew to, was it New York or something? And then straight on to Malmö. So they played like virtually three tournaments with very little to no practice whatsoever. Of course, they didn't do that great, and that's when the pressure hit them, and the public outcry just went bananas. And I think that affected all of them, and that kind of set the tone for the whole team. And then actually, the late 2019, they made the finals at the CAC. True. You know, they did okay at another tournament in Malta. It wasn't too bad, right? But they were thinking of it at the time that it was end of the world, and they were, of course, super shitty because of the standard that they had set.
Who used to be in the final, or the semis, or having a chance to win, of course.
Yeah, so it is what it is.
What about this then? One thing I want to ask before we move on to like the later lineups and eventually obviously the non-finish one is, as I alluded to at the beginning of the episode, because this isn't an org that's got like $1 billion that can just overpay. You're not Paris Saint-Germain in football. You can't just pay like, 100 billion, yes, of course, bring the guy over. Like instead, like a part of even why the project made sense to me also is because you go with the finish angle, and at the time there's no one specifically trying to make a finish lineup. If you get lucky, like you did in the case here with Allu or later with Sonny, you might get a player even goes, right, well, I'm finished, I want to play in a finished team. Essentially, you get that guy for cheaper than he should be. Like the market value, if that guy wants to play even in mouse sports, he's going to get more. So I won't say the figures, right? It's up to you what you want to say, but I'll just say it like this. At the time that ENCE was one of the top 3 teams in the world and was beating Astralis, was in major finals, was always a semi-final threat in these big tournaments. If fans don't know, right, it's not that Astralis was the best paid team in the world, but they were a very well paid team and they were the best team in the world, right? If we look at teams like Astralis, Team Liquid, all I'll tell people is ENCE players made something like, let's say, a third or a fourth of the salary that those players do. Meanwhile, you have teams that were placing much worse than ENCE, and an obvious example would be FaZe Clan. They were making 2 or 3 times themselves what an ENCE player would make. Like, how does this angle work out in the sense that, like, How do, as a company, it's just not possible to match those salaries, right? You've got to sort of work on a budget, because that's the part that I'm always amazed by as well, is fans don't know. They almost think there's a direct connection between how hard you try as the player and your salary, but there isn't, right?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have been able to capitalize on the success that the teams had over the years in terms of commercially. We were really doing a solid job getting a lot of good partnerships with Red Bulls, Samsungs, Telia, a bit telco here in Finland or in the Nordics, and so on and so on. So we were definitely doing a really good job of commercially making this viable. And we definitely were not paying the highest salaries, that's for sure. I don't think we will ever be that team, someone comes in from some rich dude decides to buy us, then it's a different ball game altogether. But it's hard for me to, of course, compare like what other teams were doing. But they were, I feel like our players were definitely making reasonable salaries for the matter of the fact that they had just risen up to the top level. It's not like they were proven top level players. They should be getting paid top dollar. But they were definitely getting a reasonable compensation for where they were. And we we signed new contracts with them in the duration of 2019 once they started to become a solid team, because before that they were definitely underpaid for what they were at the time. Yes. We've just been able to really do a really good job in terms of commercially making it viable. As the team became bigger, of course, there was a massive interest here in Finland at the time with the local businesses and the marketability and everything. It just all kind of blew up from a media perspective as well, and we were able to ride that wave really well.
Because obviously, what you have this period, it was mainly the online period, to be fair. So there were a lot of people sort of deleted it from their memory, I noticed, where you had the Finnish lineup still with Sonny and you were trying the different versions of the lineup. Right. What I want to know was this: what in your mind is the break when you decided, like, it's no longer has to be a Finnish Counter-Strike team? It wasn't just like one player's available. There must be a moment where you sort of decide, like, if we do this, we might just be going for good. Because obviously now there's not even any Finnish player, like Katowice even left. Like, was that a big moment? Was there, because the original premise was it was going to be a Finnish team. So is it a tough moment when you have to decide, like, I'm going to give that up for now? Is it something you want to go back to in the future?
It's something we already, I think ever since Wilkie, Nicholas, our GM, joined us, which was, I think, in somewhere along the lines in 2019. I think it was late 2019. I think it was something that we, sometimes wondered, like, if it all goes to shit, like, how, like, would we go international in terms of CS? And we always said, yes, we would. Like, we don't see why we shouldn't, because of the fact that we were one of the Louvre agreement teams. We had a certain obligations to be at a certain threshold of teams, right? Like, we need to be up there. And if we're not capable of doing that with Finnish components, then we will have to go international. We knew it would be hard in terms of convincing the fan base and everything, but we never thought it would be impossible by any means. But when did we realize we had to do it was probably straight after when the whole shit show happened on social media, when allu was an HLTV confirmed.
Podcasting,
that whole thing, and then it all exploded, and we started kind of figuring out what kind of pieces do we have left and what can we do here. I think it was just a matter of a couple of days, and everyone was like, okay, screw it. Like,
by the way,
it's the only reasonable way to go.
One thing that always confused me is, why did that cause such a blow? Because here's the weird thing. The stuff he actually said on that podcast was fairly tame. It wasn't like he even said anything like super crazy. And also, those players, if people don't know, they'd already had behind the scenes those bloody discussions, and people knew all the story. Like, it's not, as far as I can tell, there was no fresh detail. It's just for some reason, all the players sort of collectively just came out and made these sort of statements and distanced themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird one for sure. I don't even know to date, like, what pushed these individuals, Sonny and Sergey, to do these things. I don't think it really matters to me anymore either. But it was definitely very, very confusing, and considering the fact that at the time Sonny was a shareholder in the company. He was
a bit awkward.
A company sure. he's an owner of. willingly, which is thumbs up for that kind of way of doing things, right? That's a long road. But yeah, I don't really know. I think it was just a lot of people who were not feeling well expressing their nausea. If you know what I mean, like mental, sure. all their mental drain kind of coming out.
Yeah, I would even say, just from the little I know and could say, if you're a random casual fan, that story isn't as simple as it's painted either. Like I alluded to, some of those people now, effectively, as far as I can tell, they were part of the, these terms all sound so sinister, like the group, the conspirators, they were part of the group that made these decisions. And then later, I think just because the fans thought it was just allu, they conveniently used that as a way to sort of slip out of the end storyline and not take any blame. Like, they made it seem like, oh, he was the evil mastermind. It's like, he wasn't. Come on, mate. He wasn't. I mean, it wasn't like that.
To make one thing clear, I just none of the people behind in the back office wanted to do any changes. We wanted to keep it as is. Like, my motto is like, don't change something that works. Like, that it makes up. I've seen it so many times in the duration of all kinds of CS teams that it can all just go to shit with just one little switch. But as a company, we were in a shitty position because we were in the middle of negotiating that said lower agreement deal, which is a massive thing for a company like ENCE, who doesn't live off of VC money, but actual commercial viability. And imagine if in that situation where we had just risen to the top and we become a relevant discussion in terms of international Counter-Strike, all of a sudden there was a world where we would have lost like half of that CS team, middle of the season, basically. We had no money to go and buy like great individual players to build around, for example, allu and a couple of others, right? So we could have potentially lost the deal, not be one of the teams within the lower agreement, and I don't think that would have been a great look in terms of big picture for ENCE. So for sure. I think we had zero choice in terms of how it all played out.
One thing I want to ask about before we move on to the non-finish lineup is, for me also, the last moment when it could have all been saved and been awesome was all riding on the Yampi story. Because if people don't know, like, just the eye test when you watch this guy playing like FPL, he clearly was mega talented. Like, he actually does look like, no joke, like, I don't know if I'd go as far as say like a prodigy, because like, when you have the simples and Z-woos, you probably should reserve that term for like, there's only a few people allowed that. But put it so, he looked mega naturally fucking skilled, and I've heard he was a grinder. And obviously the whole story where he was literally trying to sue Valve to play a professional Counter-Strike. The guy clearly cares a lot. Now, the problem with that one is it's actually extra tragic, because essentially, isn't he technically actually able to now play as a pro? But that only sort of happened after the shit where he tried this period where you were essentially going the days route, where it's like, look, if he's really good, we'll use him even if he can't do majors. Let's just see how it works. And that was like, it was sort of starting to work and not work, and he was in the middle. But then essentially, unfortunately, the timing of when Valve essentially said you can just play for real was when he'd already sort of switched to Valorant, right?
Yep, exactly. No, Yampi had been in our discussions and a lot of teams' discussions for a while. I think he was on his way to OG when that team was built in 2019, and so forth. Well, eventually in 2020, we decided like we were in a situation where that gamble kind of made sense for us, and we decided to take it. As such a vibrant, positive person, people loved him, especially here in Finland. Mega talented, and we kind of felt like we wanted to give him an opportunity. And there's so much to play aside from the Valve majors, so we didn't think it would be the end of the world. And then, eventually, when we were building the international squad, Yampi was, of course, one of the options for us to use for the new lineup. But because of the VAC ban situation, he wasn't a choice when it came to picking up these international players, because they wouldn't want to have a player that was unable to play at a major. Lo and behold, it goes by maybe half a year since he jumped over to Valorant, and the whole update to the VAC ban situation comes from Valve, and then he's eligible to play in Valve majors again. But I think didn't he say somewhere on a stream or something that he's considering coming back to CS? Yes. Eventually. So he could definitely do it if he wanted to, for sure.
Sure. Right, okay, then obviously now we come to the lineup where you go fully international and it's essentially becoming the squad we know now. Right, this in itself is far from a fucking obvious move. This is one of those examples where I wonder how the org, like who decided this, who came up with the vision, because basically, since you are now international and there's no special reason like, well, I'm Finnish, so I'll play for ENCE, I even think this actually makes this way more impressive as scouting, because the 3 players you started off with, which is still the core of the team now, Snappi, obviously coming from Contact, Spinx had been there in contact with him, and then Dika was just playing in Sprout. It's like, I've told people, like, dude, these players were just available. Like, there's tons of teams good. Any big international org could have these players. Like, by the way, like, it's not like they would pick ENCE over these squads, even if you have the big money and all the big players stuff. So, like, these are, I mean, the joke I even made is this is when Big almost made the mistake going back German, because they used to get all the Sprout players, and then they missed probably the best generation of Sprout players ever with Dika and Spinx. It's like, mate, you could have had those players. So, like, these 3 players, when you sign them, what was the logic behind these particular players? Like, Snappi at that point in time, some people might think he'd be washed up. You know, it's like he's had quite a long career.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first big signing is actually Saw, our coach, who is the head coach of the team. He came in with the Finnish team still being intact. Twista got banned. The whole ESIC thing happened. And we brought in Saw. He quit playing, and he was given the reins. Like, he was given, like, you are now the man who decides who plays in this team, and we give you the mandate to start building a lineup. And of course, we utilized the existing players that we still had at the time, who were still in consideration for the 2021 lineup,
yes,
which was Allu, Dodo, and then we had Sadix, who was signed with us at the time as well. Those guys were, of course, consulted. They were making lists of different people. I think for all of them, Snappi was actually everyone's first choice. Like, everyone put him as the number 1. And very quickly after the guys getting in touch with him, with our head coach and our GM, they realized there was really, really good synergy between him and our coach Eetu Saw. And we felt like, considering everything that we had just been through, we could really use a level-headed, mature, a bit of an older figure who's already seen life. He's been actually, like, Snappi has, you know, an actual education. He's had a real life actual job. You know, he knows how the world works, right? We felt like we needed a figurehead like that in the team. And we felt also that he's always had to play the second fiddle in the Danish community, because the bigger dogs would always come and chew all of his big talents.
Absolutely.
Like, yes, the Charleses of the world would always come in and just snatch all the best players from his team. So he would only get so far, which is about, you know, top 10 in the world-ish, and he would make some deeper runs in playoffs, but then eventually, once he did that, his players would be just stolen from him. So we felt like he definitely had never been able to kind of fully showcase what he's being capable of doing. So it was a no-brainer. And for him, of course, he had to like, why did he choose us? You'd have to ask him, but I know he definitely went on and asked about us from other people, from people he knew, he trusted. And then, lucky enough, we've always been an org and people that do our things the right way. So he was getting positive feedback about us as an organization, and he decided that he wanted to build a team with us. And he was the one who brought in Spinx. He had played with Spinx in Contact for a little bit, but he felt like he was the kind of guy that had so much untapped potential. Well, we now see how much untapped potential he had, but we as an org were like, okay, cool. And people would laugh their asses off if I told you how much we paid for him. It's
so low, it's mental, I bet.
It is actually mental.
Sure.
Like,
that's why you know how they do it the same with every great football player. Mate. Everyone always claims later, I always knew he was going to be great. It's like these deals tell you they didn't. Like, there wasn't no bidding war for this guy. There was a couple of the orgs were interested, but they're all smaller ones. You know,
the discussion was between, do we get, like, because we had just bought out Sadix from a Finnish corner, we kind of wanted to have him, and then Snappi was like, no, like, we should definitely get Spinx. So we had, I remember it was a call with me, Snappi, our CEO Mika, our GM Nicholas, and Marco, and Marco was just like convincing us, like, hey guys, like, we definitely should do it. Like, he's like, this is such a cheap investment that it's, trust me, I know, like, and he managed to convince us. And I mean, we all know now that was a pretty solid pick to take to have him in the team for sure.
Sure.
And then do you have us also one of the first ones up there in the list of guys, like he was brought in as a star, as the mechanically mega skilled player who they could build the game around a lot. Yeah, I mean I think he was benched from Sprout. I can't remember if he was. Did we buy him out or was his contract running out? I think we bought him out, but it wasn't a big transfer either. But yeah, I mean it's the when you think about the scouting part and the whole that pick that situation, it's all about finding the right pieces in on the helm. So for Nicholas or GM to find the right coach and then to find the right in-game leader that work well together, who think about the game in a similar fashion, and you trust them and their understanding of the kind of players we need. And then it's up to us as an org and up to them as players to kind of do our due diligence of them as individuals, as people outside of the game, because the guys will know the insides and outs of how these players are within the boundaries of Counter-Strike. But then we also have to make sure that as human beings, they're capable of functioning together.
When he was on Contact, because it was a Flashpoint org, Snappi actually already did tell me privately, like, oh, the Spinx guy's really good, but this is also like one of the first teams they were in. That was a bad team if people saw like that lineup didn't work at all. So the thing is, like, I don't think even Snappi himself knew how actually fucking mega this guy is. Because there's another example of like just a perfect thing just falls out of the sky almost. Like, it's not even like he's just a good player. Like, I'd contrast it this way. When the other ENCE lineup got to the top and Sergey was the guy who got like the star credit and he got in those top 10 lists, etc., like, he was a good player, certainly. Like, his skills were really nice. He had like a nice all-round game. But like the Spinx factor, like the eye test is mental, mate. Like, he really is like one of these, like, he's like one of the hockey players that scores 50 goals in a season. Like, you just watch it, you're like, this guy is absurdly skilled. Like, it's actually, there's another example of where, like, if you're in a smaller org, it's just a blessing if you can get a player like that. It's going to do so much for the team, as people can see, right? I mean, legitimately, you probably have one of the top 5 players in the world.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think anyone would have expected him to go this high in terms of the skill ceiling. For sure, I already saw him like play early on. I'm like, oof, okay, this guy's crisp. But the more experience he's been able to gather playing against the top dogs, the more comfortable he keeps on getting, the better his decision making becomes. In roles where he needs to kind of react into things happening on the other side of the map. For example, you think of Mirage Palace, for example, how he can find the timings and make plays. Something similar actually what Sergey used to do back in the day, when you think about it. And then it just feels to me that you'd kind of think that the top players would start countering the things that Spinx does, but he just figures out a new way. He just figures out a new timing, a new way of capitalizing on different scenarios, and it's mega impressive to see what he's capable of doing and how he just keeps developing as a player.
Obviously, in theory, if this was like a normal press interview, you're supposed to just ask all the nice questions. But I'll ask you one where it's a bit of an awkward question, but it's one that people are going to surely be thinking about on the topic of Spinx. So I'll give you an analogy. So my favourite football club since I was a boy in football was Liverpool, right? And Liverpool actually is a team. It's on a different scale, but they're also a team that in the last few years, they've been very successful from scouting, right? It's been getting the right players at the right price, like, the smaller price, but they basically have a player that reminds me of this Spinx scenario. They have a player called Mohamed Salah, who's an unbelievable striker, and he probably is too good to be on Liverpool. Like, Liverpool itself now is really good because he's on it, but like, as in, like, if you look at how much money they've spent and where the team was, like, put it this way, even if you're a fan of the team with him in and you're loving it, your party is just like, we've only got a couple of years of this though, because like, he's probably not going to just retire at Liverpool. He's probably going to be on Barcelona or fucking Real Madrid or Paris Saint-Germain. Some team's going to come along eventually and offer this guy like, the most money possible. And he's going to go there. And if you're a fan, you just have to accept that. And you have to go, right, let's enjoy the years we get though. Let's win as much championships as we can now, because we know it ain't going 20 years on this thing, right? There's got to be sort of that vibe with Spinx, because people think of the conversation we've had about the economics of the business and stuff. Odds are, it's probably like, unless something radical happens happens, ENCE probably isn't the biggest org in the world in 3 years, you know. Like, players have a lifespan, how long they play in one place or another. When it's with a player like that, how do you envision what to do with someone like that? Because on some level, if he gets an outrageous offer in 2 years, a year, it has to be considered by all parties, right? So how do you evaluate that? Because there's another thing about being the smaller orgs I think a lot of fans don't understand, is sometimes, for example, you actually want to sell if the price is right. If they offer really way above what it should be, sometimes it makes business sense for the org to sell then if they're going to go eventually anyway and then put it back in. How do you envision when you have basically talents that's going to be tricky to keep?
I mean, of course, especially when you see players pop off the way let's use Spinx as an example, pops off. Yeah, I mean, it's a consideration to think about for sure in the big picture. I do say that the salaries that we pay nowadays are competitive for sure. But in the big picture, the only thing that doesn't change in esports is changing. Like, things will eventually change. It's just the way it is, the nature of the beast. We did actually continue contract with all of our players just recently, so they are still bound to us for a extensive period of time. So we're good in that front. But what happens in a couple of years, who knows? I don't think we have to kind of worry about it all too much, in the sense that we know that eventually, if these players keep on going up these trajectories, there will be situations where a big dog will come in, and if they want to buy a player, they'll typically just come in with a truckload of money coming in, and then they say, we're buying him. But we don't have any right now. For example, we would have zero interest to sell any of the players. Like, I don't think any of the players would like to, like, unless someone just literally went decided to go bankrupt and just truckload like millions to someone. I don't think they would want to leave either, because of how well the team is doing today. Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's consideration, but all at the same time, it's not something we worry about too much. You know, it's just part of the game.
The other thing that's wild to me about this lineup is, I know technically you did have the player change because Maden came in. It's not exactly the same lineup as like at the PGL Stockholm Major, for example. But it's also wild as well. There's another thing no one would predict. Think of all the roster moves that happened at the end of last year. Like all these massive, the G2s of Vitality throwing millions around, trying to get super teams, building it all, even all the NA teams, stacking all players with big salaries. Like, the idea your team would be like third or fourth in the world, again, is crazy. Like, this is like, they couldn't work out better almost.
Yeah, and also, again, a very reasonable buyout for us to get Maden into the team. I did think about this too when we were making that change, you know, like, how is this going to work in terms of roles? And they kept telling me, like, you know, no, we feel like we need another aggressive player. I'm like, yo, dude, you guys are already super aggressive. Like, how is this going to work? But it actually does make a lot of sense now that you see it in when they play, right? I mean, the way that they swapped roles a little bit, it's definitely upped Spinx's capabilities even higher. Maden's just, the way that he can play as an entry is just insane. He might not get the most insane numbers, but he can make this one or a couple of plays here and there where he just goes through a smoke, finds a timing, whatever it may be, that can win you that round that you need to win to win a big game, right? So yeah, I mean, I remember a lot of people were actually questioning this move and thinking, like, how does this even make sense? But yeah, I guess here we are. It made a lot of sense. And I think the big part of it is too, Maden, socially speaking, has brought in, I think, just a ray of sunlight in this team. He's such a positive guy, very talkative. I think he's become like a second caller almost in this lineup, which is a big thing. It helps Snappy's life tremendously.
The funny thing is, the one flaw I think the ENCE lineup has is actually because the lineup has been too good in the game. Because since the individual players are popping off, Snappy's doing a great job. The map pool is fucking amazing. Like, that's another thing. It's a legit top team. It's not just like a fluke team where if they play these two map. No, the map pool looks really good. The veto's all great. But as a result, it means that the team gets to the point where it's at the point where it's supposed to win the tournament. It's in the semi-finals of the major. You're playing the biggest teams. Like, if people go back and look, the only teams that's beaten ENCE in best of three usually is against the best squads in the entire world. Like, the tough part then becomes, as you saw at the major, obviously, right? What happened at the major, if you're a fan who hasn't watched Counter-Strike before, that's actually what you should expect would happen when people who are rookies go to the semi-finals of the major, and they're also playing against, like, the greatest player of all time, the fucking Major Chat. Like, unfortunately, I know we all want it to be like the Spirit story, like, somehow they play great anyway, and win or lose, it doesn't matter. It's just, unfortunately, like, that's like, it can, if you've been on the game long enough, you just know it's just likely that you're gonna that's the moment when it might go wrong. That's the moment when people might have a bad game. They've never been in that situation. Give me some thoughts on that, because now the battle isn't any of the other things. Not getting better players. It's not we have to get another map. Now it's you've got to overcome essentially this aspect, the experience part, right?
Yeah. Now it's optimizing. Now it's definitely optimizing, and it's you have to go through those situations. You have to live through those losses, which they did in the semifinals, where they got nullified by Navi, who were just leaps and bounds ahead in that specific game. You take the learnings, and the next time around we are in that situation, you're not going to be as nervous. You are going to be more assertive. You're not going to think of it as such a big deal to be in that position. And it's just natural as a human being to for it to affect you. There's very little. I don't think there's a lot of people that can go in those situations and not feel like there's any extra pressure if they haven't been in those situations before. But now it's definitely for us as an org also trying to help them out, figuring out ways for us to coach them from a psychological perspective and help them go in the right direction. But also for them as a team, it's about them getting those learnings. Now, as we do this, they're also playing in the playoffs of Dallas. That's going to be another possibility for them to play in front of the crowd and get comfortable in that situation. Even if you're playing with a stand-in, a couple weeks time, they're going to be in Lisbon. They're going to be playing in front of a crowd once again. It's about being in those positions, because this team was born during the COVID era where everything was online, and the major, this PGL major, was the first time for four of them to play in front of a crowd, right? Like, that's something to consider.
This is just a random question, but do you take any satisfaction in the fact that Snappi is like an esports boomer, but he's able to still do this?
I love it.
He's had a long career, hasn't he?
Yeah, I know. I love it. I mean, we as well. I mean, I'm 6-7 years older than him, but no, 6 years. 5-6 years older than him, but it's very, very cool to see, and his passion for the game. I mean, it's just phenomenal, and he wants to defy the odds. Like, he wants to be the guy who's playing up until he's in his 40s. So that's what he's saying today. Until something, his body starts hurting too much to play 8 hours a day. But no, it's cool to see, and the level he can play at. Like, he has these pop-off moments, like insane situations where he's going to win a round for you with just individual prowess. It's so cool to see a guy who's well in his. Well, not well. He's like 31 now. He's 31 years old, and he can play against the best. That's really, really cool to see.
By the way, in this story, obviously there's a lot of like crazy moments. Like, things have to happen a certain way. Things go badly sometimes, with the Sunny example, etc. Like, do you feel over the journey of ENCE? Do you feel like you've been lucky? Have things just happened for you? Has it all been hard work? What do you feel like?
I think you earn luck. I don't think luck just comes in. You have to earn it. You sometimes, like, a lot of times, you have to risk it. Like I said in 2018, we went all in, everything in the middle. It was either this works out or ENCE is out of business, basically. Then fast forward to a couple of years, the whole abomination of the Finnish lineup. Everyone was saying, "Oh, ENCE is over. We're never going to be seeing them again in the top echelon of Counter-Strike or anything relevant of that nature." Well, here we are. We took the learnings, we built an infrastructure, we managed to create a team that's in the very, very tip top of Counter-Strike. I think that's actually more impressive than the first time round. The lightning can strike once, but typically if it's the second time coming, it means there's a trend, right? You are doing something right. So I take satisfaction in the sense that we've been able to learn from those mistakes and kind of slowly but surely building an infrastructure and a philosophy that seems like it can build teams that can be some of the best in the world.
It sounds like one final business thing I want to ask about is you alluded to the fact that like it was key to become a Louvre team and to be like a partner within the ESL circuit. It's obviously the major circuit in Counter-Strike. This is an area also where fans won't understand the journey of the org, because in 2019, a fans again going to know, right, ENCE was the second or third best team. It's like, yeah, but the problem is when you come to this period where you and business partner with the bigger companies, that's based on your company. Unfortunately, it's not based on how good your team is in the game. So I noticed that you guys had the same problem that in 2020 and 2021, Gambit and Heroic were having, where their team was going to number one in the world, but every time you come to a Blast tournament, you come to another, it's like you're the one coming through the showdown, you're coming through these qualifiers, you're actually the number one team or number two team, but you haven't got the direct invite, you don't get put in the groups. So the Louvre one you've got, the Blast one, obviously you're on the outside a little bit. That must be the trickier part about being the smaller org, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we were also in those discussions in 2019 with Blast as well. But it ended up so that we were part of the Louvre teams, and I think that's a great backbone for us. Definitely enabled us to build this international team. If we didn't have those Pro League spots 2 seasons a year, I mean, you have to remember the comparison between the Blast and the Louvre ecosystem. There's a massive difference. I mean, for ESL Pro League, you only get 2 seasons a year, right? The rest of it you have to earn through rankings, EPT points and all that kind of jazz. You get nothing for free. In Blast, you get basically 15 steps ahead of all the teams that are not partner teams. Like Marco Snappi has been joking about it on social media, how it's been a qualifier inception for them to make it all the way into the spring finals. It's like 15 qualifiers later, where yet another qualifier that happens in Lisbon for the world finals, right? It's a long grind.
Right, at the end of this interview, do you have like a final message? Maybe you can touch on like what do you want ENCE's legacy to be? Obviously, by the way, this could have been a whole interview separately about other aspects of ENCE. Obviously, you have the best StarCraft 2 player probably ever from Europe, etc. We'll do all that one day. But like as an org, people mainly know it as a Counter-Strike team. They obviously mainly know the Finnish aspects. So what do you want the message to be for fans?
That's a good question. What do I want it to be? No, we've been able to build something from a market that is so small, and people consider like we should be a feeder, but we've actually been part of the big leagues. Like anything's really possible when you just put your mind into it, and you have the right pieces, you have the right people, and you keep grinding. No matter like the shit has hit the fan at ENCE. So many times that I can't even remember all of them. Fortunately enough, actually, probably. But we've just kept on going and learned our lessons, been able to capitalize when we've had the opportunities, both commercially and competitively, and run with it. And I hope, it's been great to see, even though we don't have any 0 Finnish players playing for our CSGO team, which is our marquee team, right? We still have a ton of Finns that are still fans of us, but it's great to see also that we're gaining a lot of traction internationally. Not surprisingly, Poland has been rising in numbers with Diha and Hades, and now with Snacks coming in as a stand-in, we're basically Polish now, right? But yeah, no, it's great to see, and all the love.
Kiitos.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio, Rajcula, Kyle R, Pacy, Travis Goff, ochs, Animosity, ButtPounder420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Tooorin, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to find out who upcoming guests are going to be? Maybe even suggest them on the topic for my content. Maybe you want to appear in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me, or ask me a question for my video AMA. Well, if these perks, or indeed any of the others available, intrigue you, then join the Skrill Illuminati today. Put the money where your mouth is. Where? In the description box below and the Patreon link.